longer interview we're going to do for Warner Brothers.
All right.
Great.
This is Jose for WB International.
Charlie, is it true that you've always had kind of a fascination for this myth to the point where, as a kid, you would imagine yourself being Arthur and even had a wooden Excalibur?
It is true. At around the time, which was very early in my life, that I identified that I desperately wanted to spend my life working in film, which is around 6 or 7. King Arthur, the Arthurian legend told by John Borman in Excalibur, was a very important film to me that I watched over and over and over again. And it was one of the first films where I'd looked sort of beyond the story and tried to understand the logistics of filmmaking. But also because I was still a kid and I was so enthralled with this film that it informed my play, you know. So when I was out in the backyard or in the fields behind my house, what I would spend a lot of time doing was pretending to be Merlin or Arthur. And, you know, I certainly had whittled, taken many, many hours to whittle this big piece of wood into a wooden Excalibur. But I also had a staff that I super glued a big marble to, and I would sort of get talcum powder in my hand and like cast spells with my rod and then blow the talcum powder into the air as I was casting spells. So yeah, it was it was an important film to me in my childhood.
And but this is we're seeing an Arthur like we've never really seen before. This is a man struggling with his identity, right?
Well, I don't know if Arthur is struggling with his identity necessarily. That was never really my interpretation. One of the things that Guy Ritchie does that is such a departure in his telling of King Arthur from the way it's normally been handled is that Arthur usually is a noble man who, you know, has a sense of his destiny and goes on the noble quest to become the noble king. What Guy wanted to do was make Arthur an everyman, a much more accessible hero who's a man like you or I who's just trying to go through his life and do the best he can, and all of a sudden he's presented with this absurdly grand destiny that he's the King of England, and he says, listen, I don't want it. And that's the thing that I think makes this a very vital and interesting telling of the story, because what Guy and I were really excited about exploring is why he rejects this call to duty. And of course that comes down to fear, the way, you know, a feeling of inadequacy, or that, you know, he's not, doesn't have the requisite training or skill set to be the king. But of course, in reality, anybody can do anything, as long as you cultivate a sense of self-belief. So what a lot of this journey is, rather than struggling for a sense of identity, it's more about tackling Arthur's inner demons to strengthen his sense of self-belief and start to believe that he is capable of being the man that everybody needs him to be.
And in that sense, his relationship with the sword, with Excalibur, is key. What happens to him after he holds it for the first time?
Well, it's really interesting. Well, there's another thing that Guy did was so interesting. Historically, Excalibur has just been a symbol of the true king, you know, and really that's as far as the significance of the sword goes. But in Ritchie's Legend of the Sword, it's sort of like an ambassador of truth, if you will. It's a channel directly to the energy that we all harness, both good and bad. But in order to, it's sort of like the old classic Jedi story, you know, in order to really be able to benefit from the full force of the light, then you need to get through the darkness. And the darkness is, of course, all of his personal demons and his sense of personal inadequacy. And the other side of the coin, because it can go either way, is that his uncle is, of course, surrendering to the dark side. And so it really becomes, you know, a classic story of light versus dark, good versus evil.
By the way, how was the sword to handle?
It was good. I mean, you know, it's a responsibility. It's big, heavy, you know, not particularly sharp, but it's a sword, you know. And initially, when we were doing all of those fight scenes, we were using a plastic sword for all of the obvious reasons, because it's pretty dangerous to be wielding a metal sword around like that. But unfortunately, it's hard to pull the force. So while we were sword fighting, I kept breaking the swords over and over again. So they finally just said, listen, this is crazy, we're going to have to use the metal sword. But then, you know, that comes with a certain responsibility. I've done a lot of fighting in my career as an actor, and mistakes happen, and people's noses get broken, and people get black eyes, and it's terrible when that happens, but you're like, well, it'll, you know, go to the doctor, they'll fix it. But if you hit someone with a sword, it's not that easy to fix, you know, you can kill someone. So it certainly was, you know, there was a sense of responsibility, and you know, it was kind of nerve-wracking at times to do those more extreme moves, because if they went wrong, someone was going to get very hurt.
How much did you enjoy working with Guy?
I loved it. I really love Guy. I've never had as much fun making a film as I did with Guy. I mean, it sort of was like going to work with a really good pal every day. It wasn't sort of like a classic director-actor relationship where the director's clearly the boss and the actor's, you know, clearly not the boss. It was much more collaborative and like just two pals trying to figure it out together. And he pushed me. I mean, there was two things that I really learned from this film. First, that hard work and fun don't have to be mutually exclusive. One of the things that Guy recognized early on in my process is that I tend to be kind of earnest and serious about it. And he said, that's all great, but that's not what I want for you. We have to have fun every day, because this needs to be a fun movie. And if we're having fun and making each other laugh, then the film will be fun and we'll make the audience laugh. So that was the first mandate. And second of all, I've always been very preparation orientated. I do all of the work required at home, and then I come to set and just sort of go through the motions of executing the vision. But Guy, in his writing and in first of all, the script is just a blueprint with Guy. You know, ultimately it's going to come alive on the day, and there's going to be a lot of changes and improvisation. But what exacerbates that is that if you're on Monday and you want to ask him about a scene that's happening on Wednesday, he absolutely will not engage with you. He says, today's Monday and we're shooting on Wednesday. So if you want to talk about that scene, we'll talk about it on Wednesday. And I'll say, yeah, but I'm a bit unsure about it, and I just would like to be able to. He said, on Wednesday. And so what that forced me to do would be really on my game and have to show up and be able to work in real time. And Guy is extraordinary at working at real time. His brain moves so quickly, and he's so witty and able to come up with brilliant dialogue on the fly. And by on the fly, I mean literally as the camera's rolling, he'll shout out, go back and say this line instead. And it'll be brilliant, you know? So that was a challenge for me to begin with, but I felt like I learned a lot from it.
Just to wrap it up, you mentioned... I just want to ask about Jude Law. You mentioned your uncle in the movie. Mm-hmm. I think Jude is formidable in that role.
He is. Jude does an extraordinary job. I'm an enormous fan of Jude's, but I can't remember a film in recent history that I've enjoyed him more, his performance, than I have in this film. And it was very clear from day one that he was swinging for the fences. You know, it's funny, actually. The last time I enjoyed Jude as much as I did in this film was the last time he worked with Guy, so in the Sherlock Holmes films. And so, obviously, that's just a great collaboration that those guys have. But, yeah, it was very clear on the first couple of days that, that Jude was swinging for the fences. And I think every actor really relishes getting to play the bad guy, because you don't have the responsibility of being the eyes of the audience. So you can be sort of as unorthodox as you like when tackling a bad guy and really, you know, swing for the fences. And you're sort of liberated of the responsibility of carrying a story, so you can just do whatever you want, really, and take the gloves off. And I got to set the first day of shooting with him, and I hadn't quite anticipated that he was going to, you know, be just as relishing the opportunity to be the bad guy as much as he was. And so I thought, okay, how are we going to tackle this one? And, you know, I figured out ways to combat that.
You did an extraordinary job. Congratulations.